Hi, Bother Brigade. Here's what's bothering me today. There simply are not enough Latin American creators that I'm at least aware of, and possibly you are not aware of. So joining me today is LegalKimchi. So, LegalKimchi, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I will start by trying to alleviate some confusion. You may be looking at me saying, "What is this Asian guy with the screen name Kimchi doing?"
Mm-hmm.
When we're trying to showcase Latin American folks. Well, I am Puerto Rican Korean, so it's I know of two others. They're my brothers, so there's at least three of us on the planet. But being raised in a household with that mixed background, I got both of it growing up. And a little bit about me: I do video essays on YouTube. You can find me, Legal Kimchi, at Legal Kimchi on most social media. And I do video essays on kind of like a mixture of things, mostly like tabletop adjacent and geeky stuff like that, but also pertaining to my own background. I have a degree in political science, specifically empirical political science, and I am a lawyer as well. So sometimes I delve into those types of topics when the inspiration hits me. So kind of depends on my mood.
All right.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I find myself in two different worlds at the exact same time. I'm in a lot of like discords and conversations with uh, D&D creators on YouTube, and I'm in a lot of discords and conversations with leftist creators on YouTube. So I kind of drive in both lanes.
Yeah, no, I'm in a similar thing where I'm a co-host of a podcast that I just do not promote because it's about Elder Scrolls lore because I'm that big of a nerd, and so I'm like, yeah, there really isn't a lot of reason or opportunity for cross pollination between that, and so I completely feel you on that with your content, which I do thoroughly enjoy. And I again encourage all who are listening to go and subscribe to you because at first, when I first heard of you, and I forget who, but it was definitely like someone on the breadtube sphere. I had only seen, at least in some of the videos, it was about tabletop RPGs and D&D. I thought, oh, you know what, this is good just to find out because I've always wanted to play D&D. I just haven't had the time or the opportunity yet, but it's like, like on the bucket list. And I
Mhm.
also found watching some of those videos was also useful for my own world building. So it's like, oh, this is actually really important, good stuff to consider. And then you started making videos about representation when all the angry gamers got mad about black elves and that horse shit. And so I was like, oh wait, there's even more to this LegalKimchi person. Okay, and then it like just dropped in one of your videos for me of wait, and he is a Latino. Okay, no, hang on. All right, got to do the deep dive here. And it is something that I find like incredibly relevant, and it's what a big part of what I wanted to talk to you about today about representation and those videos about like hey, does it
Mhm.
matter? Does representation matter? And it absolutely does, and it's
Mhm.
something that you've touched on in you kind of did like a two-part video sort of the subject, and there's something that I just kind of want to add to that about how a lot of people, predominantly white people, won't see the kind of importance of representation because it's the default for them.
Mhm.
And that's something that I've kind of referred to in conversations sometimes as subconscious whiteness. What I kind of mean by that is like a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, are living in a predominantly white world. It's one I immediately recognize and that I shouldn't say forced, but definitely like required to live in every day because Canada is a predominantly white settler nation. And so, there's so many things that you can just identify as the culture or what's normal, which is actually just an aspect of whiteness. And then when I'm actually spending time with the like my dad's side of the family, which is where the actual like skin color and diversity and different ethnicities all come into play. That's obviously a different experience than when I talk to other people, whether it's Asian Canadians, Black Canadians, African Canadians. It's suddenly like, oh, you know what? I'm talking to someone who actually gets it, who understands this, and
Mhm.
like knows what I'm talking about or referencing, and it just kind of there's a kind of click to that I don't think other people can see or understand. And it is also a part of representation because you know it. Like I remember when I was a kid, I lost my shit watching the Little Mermaid show when they had a brown skinned mermaid girl named Gabriella showing up and doing sign language. I was like, this is incredible. And it's like, I don't know, I'm like 7 or 8 years old at this point in
Mhm.
time, but it stood out to me because like everyone else is there. And like, I understood that the crab was coded to be like Caribbean in nature with his actually like, hey, yeah, man. It's like, okay, so what are you Trinidadian or trying to be Jamaican or trying to be Bajan? Because there is differences between these cultures, my guy. But like I at least understood that because that's part of like the circles that I was growing up in. It's part of my own family history and like ethnicity. So like that stuff absolutely stands out and it sticks with you, right? Like I remember
Mhm.
this clear as day, and I'm 34 years old. So I do think that we should probably talk at least a little bit about representation and like not to spoil your own video, but I would love if you could kind of give some people a recap and kind of like a selling point about some of the core concepts in it.
Well, I mean, you hear the common refrain that I don't care who's in it. I just care that it's good. And I think that's a completely separate conversation. Like people try to conflate other things with representation um, when they're unrelated. Like representation is about representation. It's not about quality. It's not about whether or not the story is compelling or something of that nature. And so it's a dive into representation specifically. Okay. And I take it on in two fronts, like you were talking about. One of those is the refrain that you hear in like fantasy media, especially in discussions of that, or even historical media, where people are like, well, it's inaccurate or unrealistic for people of color to be in these circumstances. And that is just a very poor understanding of the history of our planet.
Mm-hmm.
Like there have always been interactions between different cultures across their known worlds. Okay. And I use that term specifically because, you know, whereas you could make the comment that, indigenous people of North America would not show up in a medieval fantasy story or a medieval story in Europe. Okay, you can probably make that argument. But if you're going to say that, there were no black people in Europe during the Middle Ages, or even going back to Roman times, or people of African descent, people of Asian descent, intermixing with these cultures, well, no, that's just not true. Cultural exchanges occurred, trade occurred, people exchanged ideas, people knew about these other countries and other peoples around the world and interacted. We have paintings from the Middle Ages that depict Black Africans in court. We have Arthurian legend, which talks about um, Black Africans in Arthur's court. And what's funny is that this modern perception, and it is a modern perception, that oh, we're just putting in people of color in these stories because of some woke agenda or whatever the buzzword they want to use is completely incorrect. In fact, the whitewashing of these stories, the elimination of the people of color, is the modern iteration, is the modern change, because in classic stories, they were there. There are burial sites in England that are talking about North Africans or the Moors or people from all around the Roman Empire, um, with African artifacts in their burial grounds in England, in North England.
Yeah, like Newcastle upon Tyne, I think.
Newcastle.
Yeah.
Not even the southern portion. And that exchange happened all over the place. I mean, the Mediterranean was a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and
It still is a thing, by the way.
it's still there so far as I could tell.
I've seen it. I've swam in it. It's okay.
uh, but it's funny to me because like historians know about this sort of stuff, and I mean, you could talk about the academic world and all that sort of stuff, but experts exist and they're a thing, and historians are out there, and they know about this cultural intermix. So whenever you see someone out there going, well, actually, that seems historically inaccurate. No, 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 just sit down, because I don't think you've had any discussions with anyone who is an expert in the field. Okay. And one of the things that I did in that, I conferred with history professors when making those videos. I happen to know some.
Lucky guy.
So I conferred with this history professor on the video, and he just sent me this like zip file of PDFs of various research papers
Wow.
talking about and documenting. Because so like all this referencing actual historical papers, and he was just like, read all of this and then get back to me. And it detailed the stuff about Arthurian legend I didn't know. Like I didn't know how many people of color showed up in Arthurian legend. And then I
I didn't
read
know
this
that either. So yeah, like
because those stories have been taken away from us. And that's the problem. It's because when you read something like um, you know, the modern iterations, and I mean the modern classical iterations of Arthurian legend, those stories are eliminated. But if you read the medieval versions of Arthurian legend, the ones from like the 15th and 16th century, they're there. But we are robbed of this with a literal like whitewashing of these stories that are modern whitewashings because the classic stories had it, and it's frustrating to me. So, I and people try to put words in my mouth. I get comments. I got a comment today
oh boy.
on that video. Okay.
Oh jeez.
Where it's like people putting words in my mouth with regards to stating like, oh, you're talking about these massive populations of POC in England, and that's just not the case. And I was like, no, I didn't say that at all. Like I said that people existed, like they were there, and not in like singular digit numbers or tens of digit numbers, hundreds of them were in
That
England.
they would not have been as uncommon as people might think.
Exactly. And the concepts of medieval ignorance and things like that are just ahistorical. Like people knew about other people and places, and that these things existed. Maybe the modern or the peasant of the age didn't travel to these other countries and see those sites, but they knew that they existed. They traded with them. They got goods from them. They ate stuff from them, spice trades and what have you. Like it happened. It's a thing. They knew about it.
Like
So
a lot of these were also just large empires that are by necessity multicultural and cosmopolitan.
mhm.
So, like the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire had
Wait.
all kinds of people.
I thought the Romans weren't real. Isn't that what that?
Oh, that. Yeah. No. Rome is actually totally a fake construct.
I see. You're one of those Rome bros. No, but like
Oh,
it absolutely happened, and it's funny to me because I try to take people on good faith, you know. Um, so one of the things that I try to do with my videos, and I'm not disparaging people who do the other way. It's just not me, right? Like who dunk on these people and um call them names and all that sort of stuff, because it is kind of funny to call them names. I'm not going to say that I'm above all of that or anything like that.
none
It's
of us are
just
perfect.
yeah. But I try to engage people assuming good faith until they prove me wrong. So I had a person come up in my comment section and was like, yeah, but what about like whites showing up in other cultures? And I was like, yeah, that totally happened too. I mean, you have Roman um outposts that go into like Tanzania and Tunisia and down the Horn of Africa into very sub-Saharan regions of Africa, where there was no doubt that they were intermingling with Black African societies and kingdoms and empires. You got the white samurai. There were Anglo or Europeans who obtained the rank of samurai or hatamoto or various interminglings in the empire. There was even a black samurai, Yasuke,
Yeah.
you know, um, very popular figure in like mythology and fiction, but also a real person who
Well,
was there.
I'm a big believer in the whole mythology starts from at least a kernel of truth, but then
Hmm.
it like builds into just something completely unrecognizable. And so it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
okay, guys, the like yes, this person or a version of the character existed. Did they do all this stuff? Probably not.
yeah.
Were gods involved? Probably not.
What was there a black African samurai? Yes. Was he the Afro samurai?
No.
No.
Although that is a fun show, yeah.
Awesome show,
Yeah,
but you know,
classic 2000s anime.
and I was Rings of Power and The Wheel of Time and The Witcher all came out in this rat-a-tat-tat of TV shows, and they cast non-European people in roles,
Oh my
and
god.
it was such a thing. So I was really annoyed by that because
Same.
um it's just one, it's a silly argument on its surface. Okay, it's fantasy world. Who cares? Your
Yeah.
your your European rules do not apply here.
It's like,
But
hey, I can believe in magic and flying dragons and that the world is on a disc, but black people, whoa, that's crossing the line. Like, f
yeah,
off.
like no sense whatsoever. Um, and then there's discussions on the historical accuracy of how this would work, and I was like, that's also a bad argument. So that was the first video. The second video was talking about kind of like the third argument, which was you know authorial intent, and there was no black. Tolkien did not write black people as the elves and all that. And
Yeah.
then it got into representation in American media, and this is something that is somewhat specific to Western media, but not exclusive to Western media. Like, there are poor depictions of marginalized communities in nearly every cinematic group or cinematic center in the world. Okay. You want to talk about anti-blackness in worldwide cinema, from Far East cinema to wherever you want to go, to colorism and like issues like that exist. I took it from the lens of the American and Western cinema. That's where I'm from. That's home to me. So I tackled it from that angle. And there's so many like bad and not thought out arguments,
I
things
mean,
that,
that's half of the internet, really.
yeah. And it's frustrating because it's one of those things where common sense isn't, because it ignores nuance. It ignores the specifics of a circumstance and the deep dive of it. Like when you talk about media, where it's like, oh, I actually got this comment. It's like, I feel sad for you that you need someone to look like you for you to connect with them. And it's funny to me because these are the same people who turn around and say, you know, I couldn't vibe with um, Black Panther because nobody looked like me, or
Yeah, like
uh,
it's the pardon the pun, it's the pot calling the kettle black.
yeah, um, because you hear that all the time. It's like, oh, I didn't feel like a connection to the cast of Kim's Convenience. And I was like, well, you shut up and sit down, because that show
Is
hits
a
me where I
Canadian
live.
gem.
um and say what you will, like, again, you bring me on talking about the my Latin heritage, and then I bring up Kim's Convenience because the mom in Kim's Convenience looks and sounds like my mother, and it's
Now we know.
so imagine, if you would, the mom from Kim's Convenience married the dad from In the Heights, and you have my family.
That sounds like a fun and interesting family. We could make a
um
sitcom about your family life.
Well, there's this one, Steve Byrne made a sitcom where he was talking about his background. It's like Sullivan and Sons, and I never really watched the show, um, but it was about like his mom's Korean, his dad's Irish, and they have a bar. And like, I relate to people of mixed heritage, even if the mix isn't mine, because there are specifics to it. Like Miles Morales hit me where I lived as well, because there's like a 15-second sequence in Into the Spider Verse where he's interacting with his dad and his mom, and he's code switching, and he's um switching between languages, and you can see him interacting with both sides of his culture, and it's just one of the most beautiful 15 seconds of cinema that I've ever seen.
No, it's part of why Into the Spider Verse is one of the greatest Spider-Man films out there, in my opinion. And again, as another mixed race person, like I completely, I'm completely picking up what you're putting down, especially with Kim's Convenience, because it's like, hey man, guess what? Growing up and being Latino and seeing really only like, oh, okay, so our women are sexy housewives and the men are either janitors or they're thugs, or if we're lucky, cop sidekick if we're really
Mm-hmm.
fucking lucky, right? And like that's it. That's my representation growing up, even though my dad, though only half black, is black passing and has always gotten a shit ton of racism for that. And so, for me, even seeing like Latino representation doesn't even feel like my own family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let alone me. And so I had to learn very early on, just again through like the sort of subconscious whiteness of the society that I'm living in, of, oh yeah, well, here's your main character. He may look nothing like you and may have different material circumstances, such as he's actually living in a really nice suburban neighborhood of New Jersey or something. You're in a working class neighborhood in a large, like, cold Canadian city. And so you learn to kind of identify sort of core concepts and morals and maybe attitudes, as opposed to just the race element of it. And so for me, it's never been a struggle to identify with a character on screen, whether they are, a man, a woman, or if they are like white, black, brown, Asian. It's, I can see the human experience and connect to that. And so when I hear people say, "Oh no, I couldn't connect, I couldn't vibe with whatever Black Panther or Kim's Convenience," I'm like, okay, so like, are you just really not putting in any work? Because this feels easy to me by comparison. But again, that has to do
Mm-hmm.
with our lived experiences and what we define as normal, right?
Yeah.
Um, and actually, like, to go back to being mixed race, I do want to touch on that a bit, because another thing that I think people don't realize is that within the Latin American community, and you even mentioned it at the top of the show, hey, who's this Asian looking guy doing talking about this? Spoiler alert, folks, we Latin Americans come in a range of colors. There's parts of Latin America that are actually majority white. There's parts of Latin America that are majority indigenous. You have certain segments, especially in coastal areas, that have like large Afro Latino communities and populations,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're in Brazil or in Colombia or Venezuela or in like parts of Nicaragua on the East Coast. Like, it's honestly fascinating wherever you go. And that's why for me,
Mm-hmm.
there's always been this great diversity. We're just kind of unified by language and religion. Just about everyone speaks Spanish except for the Brazilians and I guess the French Guyanese, who speak of officially French, but also they mostly speak their own indigenous Creole language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, just about everyone is Roman Catholic and guilty and feels guilty as all the time. So like, this is your kind of typical like Latin American unifier in that sense, but it's like, in many ways, Mexicans feel as foreign to me as Argentinians do. I'm just like, this is not what I grew up with and can relate to, but technically we're all Latin Americans, right?
Yeah, and it's funny to me, because even Latin Asians exist as a population.
Like, one of the former dictators of Peru was Alberto Fujimori.
Hmm.
He was a Japanese Peruvian, so like, that that's just one example. There's plenty living in, again, Argentina. Like there is like an incredible amount of diversity, and like I remember it was throwing so many people in high school for a loop when someone who they thought was Japanese, and they would like they tried to do the weeb shit of like coming up to her and being like, it's like konnichiwa, and she's like, so I'm Brazilian, like I know that word, but like my first language is Brazilian Portuguese followed by English. Like, and I just
It's
know a
funny
little bit of Japanese from my grandparents.
talking about the whole like Roman Catholic thing. Um, so I was raised Catholic. Uh, my
Yeah, see, it's proving
my
the point.
my first priest was this gentleman by the name of Father Kim, and Father Kim was a Korean priest ordained in Mexico, and
That
so
tracks.
spoke Korean native, spoke Spanish eloquently, spoke English kind of.
No, that's not important. It's fine.
Like he could get by. Okay, his Spanish was better than his English, and it just yeah. So there's whole communities down there, right? Like here's the funny thing, um, my partner is Mexican, and her cousin looks like me because she's like mixed Filipino Mexican. Um, and yeah, there's whole communities down there, and people seem to forget that. Like I the Afro Latino community deals with erasure, the Asian Latino community deals with erasure, the Indigenous Latino community, like,
Yeah. Yeah, there's a
uh,
lot of erasure.
Tenachuerta, you're out there doing the good work though, um, because he's been utilizing his stardom to kind of point a finger at some of the issues there because there's a representation issue in like Mexican cinema where only lighter skinned European descended Mexicans are showing up in the shows and stuff like that. The more darker skinned indigenous descended Mexicans aren't getting as much time. So, you know, it's weird because you don't necessarily think of white supremacy in Mexico, but it's there.
Yeah, spread
It's
over by the
pervasive.
Spanish.
Yeah. One of the many imports brought by the Spanish.
Yeah, alongside smallpox. Yeah. Yeah, like
Smallpox, the Spanish language, Roman Catholicism, white supremacy. You know, just the normals. That's what you do.
yeah, I mean, those are the main European exports. Come on now, right?
So, you know, I hit on that, and I hit on different types of representation because not all types of representation are good.
No, like
Okay,
if it's just like token to say like, well, look, it's there. I'm like, that's not
yeah,
substantial.
that's not good. That's not substantive. That's not having a positive impact. Obviously, negative representation exists as a thing. A lot of early Hollywood cinema and their depiction of Black people, even by Black actors, um, aren't the best. Um, Asian cinema in the 80s, like, or American cinema depicting Asians in the 80s, is still hard for me to watch. Um, and to this day, uh, Latinx communities and their representation in the media is awful. Because you're right, like it's like that bad joke that I heard a comedian state about Latin representations. They were like, you know, they got that movie Crazy Rich Asians, and she was like, yeah, we got one of those too. It's called Narcos. Like,
You know what? I'm never going to look at Narcos the same way again. Thanks for that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, phenomenal show,
Oh,
but
I love it.
why is it always drug dealers? You know, like that's where I first saw
Yeah.
Tenoch is because of Narcos Mexico, and you know, it's a great show, but why is it always drug dealers?
Well, this is something that I'm actually glad you brought up because it's in my notes as something to touch on. Unfortunately, especially in America and by extension Canada, because we just consume so much American media up here, is Americans, if you're lucky, basically know three Latin American groups. They know Mexicans, they know Cubans, and they know Puerto Ricans. And all other Latin Americans fall into one of those three categories. So even if you're, say, Panamanian, but like, oh, you came from the South, well, that means you must have crossed the southern border illegally. And it's like, God damn it, no. And, Cuban, that's a whole thing. And like, if Cusano is a slur, like the whole nine yards with the issues of America meddling with Cuba for like 100+ years at this point, and then Puerto Rico being an American territory. It's like, I think the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico or something is like how it's politically organized. I'm not too familiar. Like, I'm hoping you can maybe shine a bit of light on that.
So Puerto Rico status is kind of odd. For lack of a better term, it's a colony.
Mm.
Like, and I think what was it? It has such a sanitary designation. It's like an unincorporated U.S. territory,
Okay, what does
which
that mean?
and I think technically speaking, it is the Commonwealth, but I don't know what legal designation that necessarily has because there's like I think 12 states that go by the name Commonwealth as well. So
Well, okay then. All
um
right.
like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Like so
I didn't
I
know
don't
that. Okay, all
yeah,
right. I just thought it was just Massachusetts. All right.
yeah. Weird technical legal designations, right? But it's bizarre and it's funny because like my connection is it's kind of odd for me to talk about because my family is Puerto Rican and they've always said that and they've always been proud of it except for my dad. So
Oh, okay.
he always says like we're Spanish. And yeah, technically, you go back far enough, our family's from Spain. As if you go back far enough with a lot of uh, Latin people, you're going to get to Spain, um, just because the records go in that direction.
Yeah.
The records don't necessarily track Taino genealogy in surviving paperwork, right? It just doesn't exist. So it's like, but what food did you grow up eating? Tostones and lechon and, you know, bacalao and all these Puerto Rican dishes. It's like, can you name a Spanish dish? Did you grow up eating paella? Like what?
Which even in Spain they'd say that's not Spanish, that's Catalan. That's a whole other kettle of fish. Um,
By the way, families from the Catalan region. So
oh
that's
well,
why we brought
there
that
you
up
go.
specifically.
Hey, there you go.
Um,
See, people, we're getting into the real nitty gritty specifics here.
See, people think it's just a generality. No, it's actually hyper specific.
Yeah,
Because
like,
in Spain, in the country of Spain, there are like four different autonomous regions of different ethnic groups that speak non-Spanish languages,
yep.
like the Basques and the Catalans, um,
And don't forget the Galicians.
and the Galicians. Um, I love pointing out the Basques. The Basques are so vehemently not Spanish.
And also crucially, like one of the like last true, I guess you could say, indigenous Europeans, like their language is not connected to any of the Indo-European languages. According to their traditions, they've been there since basically like Stone Age times. So there's like, we have been here and we'll be damned if we're leaving and you're supplanting us. So yeah, but power to them.
Like,
And just like, again, incredible history and culture and food. Like, oh my god, the food is so good.
mm,
That's another thing that I don't think people realize about Spain is that they have their own regional cuisines. So like, you can go to different parts of the country and you will have cuisines from other parts of the country. So you could be in Catalonia and sure, you're surrounded by Catalan food, but then you'll also find Asturian food, Basque
mm,
food, Galician food. And it's like, damn, okay, all right. I'm appreciating this, Spain. I didn't know this about you before like living here for a bit, but this is fantastic.
yeah, yeah. And it's amazing because something that I found in the research of the representation video that I was flabbergasted by is that based on population and percentage of the population, Latin people are the least represented in entertainment based on the numbers in the population
Yeah,
of
I
the
remember
United
that in that
States,
video. Yeah.
um, which was staggering. Like I didn't think about it, and as a testament to a couple of different things. So like my father went from being a guy who like voted for Trump um, to in the last two times that I've seen him complaining about the lack of authentic and positive Latin representation in media. People can change. Uh,
That's good and that's important.
um, never stop fighting. So, but he's right, and it's something to talk about. It's something that I have the absolute honor of discussing with Lady Knight the Brave, actually,
Hmm.
um, on an upcoming project that she's working on. Check out her channel if you haven't heard of her channel.
Oh,
What are you doing?
I have love it.
I'm speaking to the audience here. I was like, what's wrong with you? You're doing something wrong with your life. Um,
Absolutely great videos.
and talking about like Latin representation in the media is like, can you think of someone who doesn't fit that stereotype? The only thing that I can think of are science fiction where Latin America doesn't exist, and even there sometimes problem. And Jimmy Smits in L.A. Law, he
Oh
was an attorney.
yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and like we're still seeing this today. Like the BreadTube is still predominantly white. It has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have like what's now known as Cornbread Tube with all the black leftist creators.
Which
Like
brilliant,
yeah. So
brilliant.
yeah. But now what I'm wondering is where's our maize tube? Like we need
Mm-hmm.
that good like authentic Latin American grain.
You know,
Where's that? Because it's like
yeah. Where's tortilla tube? I'm waiting for um
Tostone tube. There we
just on the tubes. Um,
go. We have fun here. But really, it's
I'm
like
looking for rice tube too. Like I'm looking from both ends. But you know, it
yeah,
is one of those things where like BreadTube is like this entire infrastructure of, let's be honest, white creators who promote and help each other out and create an entire category that the algorithm can point people to. Okay. Um, and Cornbread Tube is doing the same thing. And that's fantastic that Cornbread Tube is doing that. I, in no way, shape, or form, want to belittle that or try to equate the levels of the ways that the algorithm destroys black voices. Um, it's a necessity that something like that exists to point me to more of those creators because um, they get buried.
yeah, algorithms are messed up and should not be thoroughly relied upon. That's my
Yeah.
problem with where society's headed.
But here we are sitting, and I know you, you know me. Do we know anyone else? I know maybe one or two
Yeah.
other Latin creatives making video essays. I know maybe one Asian, East Asian specifically, making video essays. Like there, I mean, it almost feels like, and it may be just that we haven't been able to find each other, that we don't even have enough to make a thing,
Yeah,
right?
I really don't know. And I think unfortunately in a lot of cases, especially with Latin American people, like I shouldn't say the major issue, but one of the major issues is also a question of where you fall on the poverty line.
Mm-hmm.
Because unfortunately, like especially up here in Canada, it's just also further for people to get to for jobs and opportunities. Not to say that Latin American people aren't up here. Like, hello, there's me and like a bunch of my friends growing up and like in multicultural cities. We're here, right? But there's definitely far more of them in, say, America, just because it's closer, larger, more economic opportunity. Like there's a lot more reasons why America is, understandably to many, the land of opportunity. And so, with that in mind, though, and how there's like no real American safety net, a lot of Latin American people are not afforded the same opportunities and financial resources that might be available to any middle class suburban kid with a computer and a camera. You're
Mm-hmm.
probably like, I don't know if this might be the same for you growing up, but like in my family, I basically was like started being put to work the second I was 5 years old and had some form of fine motor skills. Is like, hey, you can start helping out around the house. Here, do this. Here, go
Mm-hmm.
join your dad on a job site. Learn some good skills of like life and how to do carpentry and painting and drywall and stuff. Right. So like that's kind of more of what a lot of the lived experience is, and having to work long, hard, difficult hours. My roommate is Mexican. I almost never see him because he's working in the restaurant
Mm-hmm.
industry. So he's like working nearly every day, and he's working from like 10 in the morning until 2 in the morning. So,
Yeah.
is he gonna start, like his own personal cooking channel? Like, I kind of doubt that.
I mean, well, think about it. Think about it. I've had my channel for about 2.5 years. I am 38 years old and I'm an attorney. It took that long for me to get into a position where I could, because I didn't have the resources. Like I've been
Yeah,
like
same.
my YouTube channel, or I started a YouTube channel when I was in college. But I didn't have the resources to keep it up. I made like a video, it was silly, and then I never continued, right? And because it was garbage. Garbage equipment, didn't have editing software at all. So if it was like a one take,
That's the classic YouTube right there.
oh man, I could have been one of the originals. Um, but I didn't have the resources for it, and I was broke for most of my adult, or most of my life, and didn't really start establishing myself until a few years after law school. Like it was, people have this idea of like attorneys and how much money they make. My first attorney position, I took a pay cut to do it.
Wow. Okay.
And I wasn't making much money prior to that. Like I was working on a telephone job doing like auto insurance claims.
Okay.
Um, and I had transitioned from doing a job at a call center doing child support for the state. And prior to that, I was working in like a jewelry store. So at a shopping mall, like it's just,
So
but
whatever's paying the bills, right? Like, I get it.
some of us graduated during a recession. So,
Hey, hello, my fellow millennial.
oh my goodness. And I worked in politics for a while too, which is a woefully low paying situation, especially in the state of Texas. Um, but like I didn't have the resources for it. And now I do. And I made it a point. And I know a lot of video essayists don't do this. Like there are video essayists who don't show their face in their videos. And it's not that I don't respect that. It's a different style. But I made it a point to put my face on camera because I wanted to have a brown face on camera. I wanted that to exist in the world. Um, like if you look at like D&D YouTube or left wing YouTube, it's just not there. I mean, even if you look at the demographics, because I looked this up, leftists in the United States are like 6% of the population and predominantly white. Here's something that I'm switching the switching it up here with you. Bear
Oh,
with me. We're going on a ride.
all right. Okay, I'm strapping in. All right.
The majority of POC, Black, Latino, Asian, whatever, are in the liberal category. I know that it's trending for leftists to bash on liberals. We almost like to bash on them more than the right wing, right? We get cartoonish on the right wing. We get angry at liberals, right?
I am guilty of this at times, I will admit.
I've been too. I've been too. I wonder sometimes, majority of POC are liberals, majority of leftists are white. Is there an element of smug superiority that goes into that? Is there a dynamic that we may want to consider? These are the people that we need to bring in. These are the people most likely to come in to leftist circles. We're not going to have a great chance going after the right wing guys, right? We're not going to have a great chance going after the fascists or even the centrists. Okay. But the liberals are kind of the next step, right? Many of us came from that circle.
Yeah, like I was raised in a more liberal family environment and just moved leftwards from that point on.
Yeah. And I get it. I get it. Okay. If you're liberal, you're inherently capitalist, and they they don't understand the underlying socioeconomic or like the structures or the systems in place, the systemic issues. I get it. I get it. I'm not trying to make an argument that liberalism is right.
Yeah, no, like liberalism is frustrating.
Yeah. But this is that. That to me should be our target audience. That should be the people we're reaching out to, because that's where a lot of us were. And we were nudged. And we were like, oh, wait, you're right. And it kind of frustrates me a little bit. And I wonder if there's a racial element to it. I wonder if there's a superiority element to it. And I wonder if it's helping. Because I come from a political background. I worked in Texas politics. I have a degree in political science, specifically empirical political science, which is using data, fact, history to prove a theory, as opposed to normative political science, which is telling people how things ought to be run. Like Marx was a normative political scientist. Okay. This is how the society should run. Whereas empirical political scientists are like, this is what actually affects society. Like, this is where things trickle down. This is what the data tells us. This is what history tells us. This is what causes things to happen. This is what power is. This is what governmental systems affect are in reality. So when I look at stuff, I try to look at it in a more pragmatic sense. Okay. If our goal is to grow the ranks of leftists, then we need to be, in my opinion, reaching out to POC liberals, especially because in the history of the United States, whenever progressive achievement has been made, it has been led by left-leaning POC, civil rights movement, suffrage movement, picket. These are the people the Chicano movement. Okay. Uvas. All right. The reasons why we have, Cesar Chavez Avenue and MLK Boulevard on the crappy side of town because of
redlining. Yeah.
Yeah. Redlining and why the crappy side of town exists and why it's always populated by POC. It's a feature, not a bug, but
yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, I wonder about that sometimes. I wonder, and maybe it's not. Maybe I'm overthinking it. It's not a racial issue. It's just a frustration with people who should be right over the fence with us and are not. But like I said, I try to engage people in good faith, and I would love to see us push more into bringing these groups in as opposed to making fun of them.
I see where you're coming from. I don't fully agree, but I don't entirely disagree either. I guess my sort of more nuanced take on it is, yeah, liberals can be pushed leftward. Like, I basically was trying to take every opportunity of that when the Freedom Convoy came to our nation's capital, because all of a sudden all the liberals in this predominantly liberal city were like, where is the premier, where is government, why are the police doing this, not doing this? And I'm like, so let me tell you a thing. And they were like, what? I'm like, yeah, no, here, look, see, and this is why, we should absolutely defund the police. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm like, wow, I just got like a 70-year-old permanent, like, civic employee who loved the cops and lived in their like suburb to recognize, hey, you know what? Maybe the cops aren't good. So maybe they're not quite there at, defund the police or abolish the police, but they've now recognized that there's problems and that the people currently in power are not going to solve those problems. Does that mean that they're going to keep pushing left, or they're just going to swing back to the conservatives because they're mad at Trudeau eventually? Like, I don't know. The other thing that I would add as like my own nuanced take is, for me, a lot of the focus is regardless of political affiliation, but just the working class. So I'm a courier. That's my main job. That's what pays most of my bills. Thank you, patrons, though. You absolutely help. But it is kind of one of those things where, I encounter a lot of people talking about stuff just casually about, taxes or this issue or this social issue. I'm like, hey, no, I see what you're saying, dude, but think of it also this way. And so I'm trying to spread class consciousness throughout my workplace wherever I can, which, like, will that be successful? Who knows? But hopefully, at least just by talking to fellow working class people in just real terms, not trying to talk about, well, according to Marx, and his notion of, the capital system and the theory of economics and about material conditions, like, buddy boy who's been at this job for like 30 years doesn't know half of those words. Like, sorry, no offense to people, but like, he's just here to work and understands real simple stuff that he understands on talk radio. But if I can break down that, like, yeah, man, hey, look at us, allegedly billion-dollar company, but like, we're having these equipment problems and whatnot, whether we're unionized or not, because we hear stories from other places whether they're unionized or not, it still seems to be the problem. So clearly there's something more to that, and it's not just unions that are good or bad. So, like, what do we think is the issue? It's these people who actually own the company and are keeping more of the money rather than paying it forward. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, like, just talking in those more simple terms while you're ostensibly describing Marxist theory, it's broken down in an understandable way.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm already getting people to realize that, like, Pierre Poliver isn't the fucking godsend that they think he is. He's the new leader of the Conservative Party up here, probably going to be our next prime minister. And it's probably going to be a shit couple of years, but he's saying a lot of the right things. But I keep pointing out to people that his housing policy is the same as the Liberals' housing policy, which is to just increase the supply of housing, but not to ensure protections for people so that they can access that housing affordably, meaning that housing only gets bought up more and more by the big investment firms that are just going to use the housing as an investment. And so the problem is not going to be solved. And crucially, the liberal team and the conservative team, who are supposed to be so diametrically opposed, can't see eye to eye, they have the same policy on this issue, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. And they're realizing, like, yeah, no shit, you're right. I'm like, so what are we gonna do about it, boys? And like, that's how it starts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I think that, like, you're not wrong. I just have another sort of additional layer to
No,
it.
and I completely agree with that. Like, you have to engage people where they are. Like,
Yes.
I don't talk to my mother about leftist politics the same way that I talk to some, you know, self-aggrandizing attorney about leftist politics, because I've had those discussions in both circles. Okay. I'm talking to my mom, then you break it down to what you're talking about, uh, working class. Don't try to make yourself sound smart. That's not the point of the conversation. The
Yeah.
conversation is making sure that the other person sees how the system is operating and how where the root problem is. And when you're talking to someone who's this, like, I've been across a dinner from this guy who just thought he knew everything. And
I hate people like that.
yeah, yeah. And
If you know a lot about a subject, great. If you try to say you know about everything, you.
yeah, like, big, like, he's rich and he feels he earned it. Which is one of those things where it's like, I am not trying to undermine your capabilities, but there's a lot of reasons why you were able to do what you were able to do. There's a lot of reasons I was able to do what I've been able to do. Okay. There's a lot of like ableist systems that helped me along. There were a lot of, um, oh crap. I mean, the manner in which I speak, the lack of accent or the accent that I have, um, whatever you want to call the accent, the idea that it lacks an accent is actually probably some white
Uh,
supremacist garbage as it is.
yeah,
Uh,
that's a whole video right there.
that's a whole other can of worms. But like all of these things helped me, and when I was coming up and studying in school and going to law school and doing all this sort of stuff, um, you know, it's easy to fall into that pat yourself on the back and ignore the systems that helped you along the way and those same systems and how they hurt people along the way. And this guy was making this comment about how black people and Latin people, I don't know, you have to question at some point whether or not there is some sort of genetic issue as to why they're uh, doing poor in test scores and all this. And I'm sitting there with my Mexican spouse, looking this white man dead in the face and going, why do you feel comfortable saying this in front of me? That's interesting. I've gotten you to this point where you feel comfortable talking about an inherent genetic deficiency in Latin people in front of two Latin people. This is going to be an interesting discussion.
Like that's
And
bold.
it's bold. That's a level of arrogance. And and it's a situation where if you were to ask that person, they would be like, I'm not racist.
Yeah. It's like I'm
Um,
not racist. Please ignore all the racism.
I'm just speaking of facts. Okay. And we have to consider all of that. And I was like, okay, okay. So I broke it down in sort of, and in that type of situation, I do start using elevated academic language, but I use it in a tone of like allowing them to follow a trail as if they're figuring out a mystery. So at the end of it, they came to their own conclusion and I just led the way.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not that I'm teaching them something. They discover it when I laid down facts they weren't aware of. You know, it's
Got to make
it's
sure you don't hurt the white person's feelings and make them feel condescended.
yeah, absolutely. And it's frustrating and it's a lot of additional labor and it's not fair.
Yeah.
And not everybody has the
Patience.
stomach
Yeah.
or the patience to do it. And I don't fault them for that. Being who I am, I put myself in that position as a content creator to a certain extent. And this is my personal philosophy. This doesn't apply to any other content creators. Everybody has their own borders. But to me, it's like I put myself out here as a person willing to have that conversation with you. And like I said, I try to take people on good faith until they prove me otherwise. Um, so I get people who are just like, I don't want to do this anymore and shut off their Twitter and all that sort of stuff. I'm 100%. You got to protect yourself. I put myself out there. To me, if I didn't, I wouldn't have put up a channel. I wouldn't have this Twitter where I say things like that. um, there's a part of me throwing down the gauntlet and saying, "Come at me." you know, I
Yeah.
I have a really huge ego.
All right, take that out of context, folks.
No. Like
I get what you're
I'm
saying.
confident.
Yeah.
I'm confident enough in myself to weather the storm. Because yes, I do get a lot of random racist comments on my YouTube. I got there. There's not a day that goes by. I shouldn't say that. There's not a week that goes by that I don't get a negative comment. And there's I've been happy because I've only had like two or three comments that were so racially bad that they were held back by YouTube's algorithm.
Okay. No, I've every now and then I do like like every 2 months or so I go and be like, okay, yeah, and there's like 30 things. They're just like Okay, yeah, I'm glad you two picked this up, so no one else had to see it but me.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, it's like
yeah,
I'm gonna block that person.
yeah. But like that also touches on something though, is that even members of my own audience or newcomers to my channel think that I'm white, namely again because of the way I speak, because this is the accent to the area, right? And
Hmm.
so, like this is me speaking normally into most other people in wider Canadian society, but with the family, that's where like I'm louder, more boisterous than even like my regular boisterous self, and that's also where the Spanish comes out, right? Um, I don't really drop Spanish words or my accent like in public very often. And like I think a part of that is just due to an innate survival instinct due to being bullied for my race and ethnicity in middle school and part of high school, which like no one's bullied for being white, but of course white people are bullied for a myriad of other reasons because bullying is just a problem. It's just that unfortunately, if you're a visible minority or a visible religious minority, you're absolutely also going to get bodied for that. So, yay, we're playing life on hard mode. And if you're a woman of color, that's like playing on extreme difficulty. Oh my god. But like I see the comments sometimes where some very again well-meaning people will say it's so good to see a white person talking about this, and then I have to break their heart and tell them, so I'm not white, but I get that I look between the lighting and everything that I look and how I sound, I'm white passing. And yet there are times when like I reinforce my ethnicness, and some people say no, it's like you're not brown, you're white. I'm like, oh well, guess what people, racism solved. Some random YouTube commenter says I'm white. That undoes all the racism and physical and verbal abuse of the past. I have a white card now, please give me that privilege, come on algorithm. And then there's other people when they realize oh wait, no, you're like you're actually like some will say half black, or oh you're Latino, oh you're like hardcore passing white for me. And it's like, yeah, you see, people, race is kind of a little more complicated than you might initially think or understand. And like I'd be lying if I said it wasn't frustrating, but at the same time it's just been so normalized for me now. And really it's also touches on something that my dad said like a couple years ago, which is very peak dad. He said in like this kind of castaway, almost jovial, joking way. But it touches on something that is his lived experience as a black man or black passing man in Canada. Where he said to me, mijo, like if I got mad about, every time someone was racist to me, I'd never have a happy day in my life. And I was like, damn, like that means like every day he's dealing with something, like someone being like,
Hmm.
oh poor black man, or oh I gotta clutch the person in the elevator, or oh we gotta follow him in the store because he's gonna steal some stuff. And like it, or like actually people just spouting racist like insults and slurs at him, right? And so
Hmm.
to be happy, it's like, you know what, like, yeah, whatever, those people are wrong, I'm right with God, it's all good. Like that's his approach, right?
Hmm.
It's not how I am, of course, but I found that to be a really interesting insight on how he views things, and how that's also just a survival mechanism
Hmm.
for like if I were to get mad about every time I experienced racism, I'd be mad every day, and that's not a good healthy way to live.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a level of things that you gotta just let go, you know. And this is true of any marginalized community, I'm sure. With the disabled community, there's just latent ableism that they let go. Like ableism in leftist spaces,
It's still
just
a
as
huge
bad as
problem.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
Huge issue.
Yep.
It's hyper unwelcoming, and the racism is still a little bit of an issue. And as
Oh,
you were
right.
talking, like being mixed throws a wrench into um the discussions of racism. And I think a lot of people misunderstand kind of the basics of mixed people and wanting to be accepted for their heritage. There's a difference between me saying, I'm Puerto Rican, and that's part of my heritage, that's part of my culture, that's part of my bloodline. And me saying I'm an expert on Puerto Rican culture and food, that's two different things. I'm not stating that. I'm not I'm not saying, I can now do a full essay on the transition from native Taino music to, Bad Buddy and Daddy Yankee. I'm just saying that, this is a part of my culture and I want to embrace it, and be accepted as, one of my own culture. And I see a lot of, you know, denial of that and a lot of excuses to deny that, like you were talking about, oh, you're white, you can't possibly. Yeah, there are a lot of light skinned Latin people generally, regardless of mixed heritage. Um, and there are darker skinned Asians, regardless of mixed heritage. And there are,
Yeah, like I've met Filipinos darker than me, right? But like
mhm.
in people's eyes, they're not brown, but I am. I'm like, bro, like Tim's literally like several shades darker than me. Like,
Like it's like even our own designations don't really make too much sense. Um, and because of the ridiculousness of how race actually operates, it's a made up thing that can have an effect on you that's not made up. you know, it's a fake thing that has real effects, but it's it is frustrating because you see little groups start forming, to protect each other of that, and I love that, but I also kind of feel like we're left out of it in, like what you were saying, the being Latinos and not having that sort of connection. Like even like it almost feels like there are more white trans video essayists than Latin ones, regardless of cis or trans status, or queer or not queer. Just like there are more white trans video essayists than any Hispanic video essayists.
yeah.
And I love all of them almost.
Okay.
Look,
you,
just because you're
you,
trans doesn't mean you're a good person. Okay. It's just.
That's true, but again, generally speaking, like there's a lot of fantastic creators out there.
Mhm.
I I personally am like always excited every time Aeronok drops a new video.
Oh my
So
goodness. Like I could list them off.
yeah,
Aeronok or, Leftist Cooks
yeah, Leftist
or
Cooks, Jesse Gender.
Jesse Gender, or I mean, or the, counterpoints in philosophy tube. I mean,
Yeah, but like I want to try and
juggernauts.
support smaller creators. Like I know that
No, no,
those two are
I'm just
basically
I'm
on the
talking
pedestal,
that.
but yeah, like
No,
I
no, I'm just talking about how,
yeah,
on all
there's a
levels.
list. There's a list
Yeah,
of like
there's
at
a
least a
list of them.
handful we can list off immediately.
Hmm. And thankfully, because of the works of, the amazing folks with Cornbread Tube, I can list off like FT Signifier or, um, Foreign Man in Foreign Land or Turb, or I can start listing folks there too.
There's Khadijah. There was also
Khadijah.
Lexicog, but she's no longer active. There's Think Peace Tribe.
Mm-hmm,
There's
mm-hmm,
John Lewis. Jawn is how that's spelled, but it's pronounced
mm-hmm.
John. Um, and there's Victory the Creator, who
Oh
I interviewed
goodness.
in the previous video, where we again talked about kind of like the dual experience of like having at least one immigrant parent, but also being born and raised in the country, and what that kind of does for having kind of like two worlds that you're
Mm-hmm,
living in. But I
mm-hmm,
know that that's also relevant for anyone who's also mixed race, even if
mm-hmm.
both your parents were born and raised in whatever host country you are. There's like this kind of push and pull of
Yeah.
where you belong or don't belong, right? Like so much of my identity is Canadian, but I'm still reminded every so often by like some of the worst fucking Canadians that I will never actually be seen as someone in this settler nation state. And then it's like, okay, it's like, that's part of why I'm proud of my Latin American heritage, but a lot of the Latin American heritage, what I do know, is an imposition of colonialism, right? And so like there's always these aspects that are kind of at war or discontented with each other, all these different little facets of myself. And it's like it is worth exploring, but it's also just like, man, I just wish I could just have some kind of good clear answer that everyone can agree with. I know that's never going to happen,
Well,
but it's kind of like one of those things that I just wish, just to make something just like a little easier and simpler.
you make 2 points that I want to touch on. First is the idea that America and Canada and Canada are supposed to be. And I think of Langston Hughes's
Yeah,
poem,
that's
America, Let America Be America Again, which
so
I know that
indigenous.
phrasing, I know that phrasing has some issues, but he's talking about, and he, he's, he's talking about the idea of a country being founded on the idea that we all belong here. Okay. Um, because the reality of these countries and the reality of Latin existence specifically is that decolonization may not be possible at this point. I cannot decolonize myself. My European, I used this phrase beforehand because it's been almost a an axiom that I tried to take to heart. Um, we are descended from the perpetrators and the victims of crime, and there's nothing we can do about that. And I refuse to feel bad for the sins of my great grandfathers um, that they committed against my own great grandfathers. Like at
I
what point?
yeah, it's like
Because it's not even a circumstance where like I am descendant from these criminals. I am also descended from the victims. So what am I
yeah.
getting mad at myself? Like it's
Yeah,
so I
there's
try
that
to
fight, that there's that internal conflict in me too. Yeah.
and so I try to discard that because I don't think it's helpful for us. Um, I think what we need to do is to do what you're doing, which is to kind of reclaim our identities and embrace the joy that we can get from both of them. Embrace parts of my Spanish heritage, but never letting that overshadow or destroy parts of my indigenous heritage. Um, and embracing my East Asian heritage as well. And like, it's one of those things where we sometimes take our ancestries too personally. And I feel this with some white people who get really defensive when we bring up white supremacy and things like that. You benefit from the system, or not you specifically, but when I'm talking to those folks, I was like, hey, you benefit from these systems, okay, set up by your ancestors. It's not your fault that these systems exist. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying this so that you can recognize that the system exists and help us to tear down that system.
Yeah, that's all it
Okay.
is.
And that's, but use that inwardly, you know, being Latin is having both of those inside of you, you know, and
By nature of how it started.
you feel guilty about it. And I do too.
Is
And
is is the guilt from the colonialism or the Catholicism or both?
¿por qué no los dos? Uh,
Yes. No, I meant C.
I said, why not both? I'm
Yeah.
translating for the gringos.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. Yeah, sorry, I should do that. I will
I,
also
I don't,
provide subtitles just in case. And actually, to quickly go back to something that we were sort of talking about earlier, is just one last thing I wanted to add. Like, I still have like a ton more questions actually. Um, but like to talk about the left and who should be targeting and liberals and how a lot of people on the left like maybe it's a supremacy thing or just like a higher education, the proverbial ivory tower kind of thing. The Again, I was about to say the biggest, but like that's not true. But a very major blind spot with the left that I find is not wanting to work within the realms of culture and religion. The vast majority of POC are religious, whether you are Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, Catholic, Orthodox. The vast majority of POC are more than likely going to come from some kind of a religious background, and most of the time it's going to be an Abrahamic faith such as Christianity or Islam is what you're likely going to get. And so, not working with those, and it ties back to Martin Luther King. He was a preacher, and a lot of the big kind of like voting blocks and really the big efforts for getting out the vote in the American South to this day come from like black evangelical groups, which seems kind of weird when you think about the greater idea of evangelical Christians in America and how most of them are white and like ridiculous and kind of scary. um you have in Georgia, Senator Raphael Warnock. He's a former preacher. Georgia and specifically Atlanta has like massive pushes to get out the vote where you have like church pastors telling people this is who we're praying for, this is what I want you to think about and go out and do and spread the word like your next family barbecue or when you're going to the salon or you're going to the barber shop, this is what you got to do. And so like churches can be very political places, especially in America, given the again cultural relevancy there. And another thing that like kind of pisses me off and frankly again shows how few of us there are out there, or at least that have been able to connect so far. I've only seen like a handful of predominantly white people also point out, hey guys, we should maybe be listening to how Latin America is doing leftism because they've had successful general strikes and successful elections that have put left of center politicians and parties into power. It's part of a larger pink wave that's going on. Like, yes, there's also blue waves that happen throughout Latin American history where suddenly it seems to all swing back towards being conservative, but it's showing that it is entirely possible to have these progressive Latin American changes and yet like throw a brick anywhere in Latin America and you're gonna hit a Catholic. And yet the idea of Catholics is, oh, we worship the Pope. I say we, but like I'm not actually raised Catholic. Thank God for that. But like, there's the idea of like you still like I know to bend, get down on one knee when I pass in front of the altar and nave, and okay, here's the holy water, and gotta make the sign of the cross and pray to Mary. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. But it's that's part of it, right? We tend to associate with like being very serious, very religious, very conservative, very authoritarian, very patriarchal, and that is all true. And yet at the same time there seems to be a lot of ostensible Catholics who will recognize, wait, but like Jesus and God command us to love, which means we should support the poor and social programs, and therefore we're going to develop a more left-wing ideology. There's communists in Latin America, whether they're like Christian or not, but there's this huge Christian underpinning that again comes from a very conservative Spanish culture of conquest and imperialism, and yet still through that basis and through a kind of re-looking of the lens, you have now this massive Latin American movement that is being very successful in pushing left-wing ideas and borderline revolutions. And it's like, yeah, hey, maybe we should look to what's working in Latin America and see what we can do to incorporate that into our methodologies up here. What can work and can't work up here because it's a different culture, different mindset, yada, yada, yada. But, like, and I kind of hate that it's like two white dudes and a white lady that I've seen talk about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of that's because
other than like the other people that I know who have talked about this, who are Latinx people such as Zots or Nuamauta on Twitter or Twitch, and like that's basically it. It's a handful of people.
so here's a little bit about me that you may or may not know. So I was at a Jesuit seminary in Louisiana for a while.
Oh, fun.
So I was going to train to be a priest. Um, and what I liked about the Jesuits specifically is they were very academic, um, scholarly in their religion. And you're absolutely right. Everything that someone says negative about Christianity is based on non, or not everything, not everything. A lot of what people have against Christianity is based on non biblical readings of the historical uh, text of the Bible. And what I mean by that is in the original translations, there weren't prohibitions against homosexuality. The Bible is silent on transgender people and basically the entirety of the LGBT community. The prohibitions in the Bible are more against pedophilia than homosexuality. This is something I learned from them.
Yep.
This is something that I learned from these priests. Um, then there's the concept of liberation theology, which is pervasive through Latin America, which is basically what you were talking about, the idea that freedom and that taking care of the people and the poor specifically, looking out for the community and espousing leftist ideals was part of the theology of Christianity in its very foundations. Um, you can look throughout the New Testament and the words of Jesus in those and see the seeds of left wing political movements um, all throughout, all throughout. Okay. And what do people not like about in the left wing about religious movements? The LGBT community, nearly silent on that. Abortion, never mentioned. And abortion was around back then, and the Bible doesn't talk about it. Okay. This is all theology that was developed afterwards. This is all stuff that was developed post the origins
Yeah,
of the
like at like what,
religion.
the third or fourth ecumenical council, like.
Yeah. So we're talking about stuff that's, coming up from, like you mentioned, various ecumenical councils, things that were done way afterwards. So the basis, the foundation is there. And these are allies. And the Latin American community knows that. We don't. Here in the North, don't get it. We villainize religious groups, unless they're brown, because there's this
That's a
weird
whole other subject, man. I know where you're gonna go to.
uh
Do we want to touch on this, or are we going to say this for like a completely separate video?
that is its own video.
Yeah,
um
right.
because there's a weird, like I touch upon this sometimes when I talk to folks. The the pervasiveness of white supremacy is the idea that it filters into the brain so much that folks think it is the only thing, like it is so powerful that is the root of all of the evils. And that in and of itself reminds me of an old quote that I heard from a CIA guy who was like, the CIA helps foster the myth that the CIA can do all that people think that they can do, you know, um, because it helps them do what they actually do.
Yeah, it's like this is
And
useful propaganda for us.
exactly. Um, and it's, and I, point this out as a Korean. When you think of colonialism, you don't think of white people.
Probably think of Japan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and so when we think of like positive or negative aspects of religion, it's like everybody kind of tiptoes through um, certain things. And, you know, Christianity becomes a sort of whipping boy as opposed to an ally, as opposed to something we can utilize as promoting the idea. Because when I talk to my mother about leftist politics, I almost solely talk about Christianity And that's what gets them, because they're like, you're right. This talks about taking care of the poor. And I phrased it like this, like I was having a discussion with her. I was like, um, we need to help the poor. There's a mandate that we help the poor. Harder for a rich man to enter go through the eye of a needle than to enter the kingdom of heaven. We know these words. Faith without works is dead. Those who judge other people are not followers of the law, but acting as the giver of the law, and there is only one God giver, and his name is God. Like, all of these are quotes that you can utilize to stop judging other people, to talk about charitable contributions and how we um, help the poor, you know, and fighting against oppressive governments and how to do that. Like, it's all there, you know. And what are the common refrains? My mother was like, well, what if I give money to the poor person and they use it on drugs? I was like, that is between them and God. You have fulfilled your end. Look to your own soul. um Let the other person can do with the money what they will. Okay. um So, like, there's a way to utilize those arguments, and I do in my personal life utilize those arguments to promote leftist ideology because it's there. It's there. Just use it.
And it's not just in Christianity. Like there's
Oh
elements
no, no.
that have been found in Islam. You have like Sikh leftists, Hindu leftists. People can find in any religion that they follow some kind of left leaning thought or an interpretation of the texts, of the mantras, of the hadiths. Like you can find those messages in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very human thing to do. And so I do think that it is a major fault of the left among its many faults, let's be real, that, we don't see religious people as potential partners and allies. And it's like, hey, sorry to break it to you, but outside of the West, people are still pretty religious. You're going to have to come to grips with that.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I think for me, the central issue that I have, that I think the other issues stem from, is that a lot of folks on the left prefer being right to doing good.
Okay, so not you know what? This is true, and again, I will admit I am guilty of this more often than I'd probably like to even admit. I'll be real.
Well,
Um,
we're all guilty of it. I'm not
yeah,
sitting here
yeah.
saying that I am clean.
Clean like a newborn baby.
Mm-hmm.
But although actually newborn babies aren't very clean. Actually, it's a little
I
messy.
I have been front row center to babies being born with my own children.
Yeah,
They are disgusting.
yeah, babies are disgusting.
I love them. They were disgusting.
No, that's entirely fair. I like to, this is not something that I think I've ever actually said on this channel before. It's going to be new to anyone hearing it. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I might even use that for like the little preview video or whatever, clickbait. But I have this kind of mantra, which is borrowed from the story of a Buddhist monk, um, which is that everyone wants to change the world, but no one wants to help mom do the dishes. It's apparently what a Buddhist monk wrote on a chalkboard in front of a classroom full of kids, and they all kind of laughed. And the monk said, "No, like it's fine, but like, what do you think this means?" And kind of talked about it, and the monk explained, well, a lot of people want to like kind of be the big hero of some kind of epic when really it always starts with something small. That's how you can spread joy and positivity and change. And so I took that kind of core thing and something that I've started saying to like people in private circles, and messaging apps like Signal, WhatsApp, private Twitter DMs, people who know me in real life. My adage, which is basically a reworking of this, is that everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to help their asshole neighbor. You don't want to help your asshole neighbor shovel snow, mow the lawn, because, he's an asshole. I don't want to see him at the communal dinner. I don't want to offer him free food because he's an asshole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. That's a very human response. At the same time, that is another human person who is in your community who, by potentially helping, whether it takes just one try or 1,000 tries, could then be brought on board. And if things go completely to shit and like there's an issue in the community, you want as many people in the community to be on your side or to fight back collectively as a community. And you can't do that if you don't connect and try and make amends and try and kind of do a sort of grin and bear it. Yeah, no, we all kind of fucking hate Deborah, but whatever, she's really good at accounting. And so everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to help the asshole.
Yeah. It's almost like we as content creators would run out of things to complain about. And we're more concerned with that than we are with actual change. We are more willing to, like, we hate compromise. We hate making the deal. And we hate people who make the deal. Like I saw somebody recently say that they were like, yeah, I was all aboard like the Bernie Sanders train or the AOC train. But then they showed themselves as, um, you know, grifters
Sellouts.
compromising and sellouts. And I was just like, well, I mean, I've worked in politics. I've been in the legislative house, and I've been in those rooms. I won't say I was in the conversations, but I've been in the rooms when the conversations were happening, and it's messy shit. Um, and it'll make your skin crawl, and it's a lot of bending over backwards.
It's that line in Hamilton, how the sausage gets made.
Mm-hmm. Like I shocked people during a Twitch live stream when I explained to them how court cases go to the Supreme Court. Because, um, like when you hear about stuff like Obergefell or if Lawrence v. Texas or whatever, you see those cases and you think, oh, okay, so a case came up and it went to trial, and valiant efforts were made by the attorneys to create a Supreme Court decision that gave us the civil rights that we were asking for. That's not how activism works. They plan those cases. They find the right candidates. They set up the situation to make it as legally advantageous so that the facts line up. So civil rights attorneys, when they're doing that sort of stuff, they plan ahead. They find the right candidate. One of the classic examples of this is Plessy versus Ferguson. Uh, they found Plessy. They recruited Plessy. They recruited him because he was a light-skinned black man who could almost pass for white. They were like,
Yeah,
we're
that
gonna
doesn't
make,
surprise me.
and
Did
it was a group of black activists who hired a white attorney to come out from his Reconstruction era fighting against the Klan stuff and come help out. Like they planned the whole thing to make it the best court case that they could get, and they still lost. But I mean, that's how activism actually works. It's messy business.
Yeah, yeah. It's more or less kind of the same up here of like, people kind of brainstorm, okay, so hey, if we want to bring this case before the Supreme Court of Canada on this challenge to like an aspect of the Constitution for why, like, hey, we have this freedom, then why not the kind of supposedly opposite freedom? So, for example, something that I have been trying and so far failing to make like headway on is we have the freedom of movement in Canada. I would like to also see the freedom to remain in place and thus not be displaced through eviction, being priced out of a neighborhood due to ethnic reasons, cultural reasons, etc., etc. And I'm like, there's a lot of ways that this could touch on things, especially indigenous rights and land ownership, which is a whole other completely massive set of intertwined like legal cases before a myriad of federal and supreme courts. Or sorry, superior courts, and then it all goes finally to the Supreme Court of Canada. And, so it's like, hey, here's this thing. How do we maybe set it up so that this could be heard and like a decision made one way or the other on it? And then how do we pick our battles after that? So I'm not surprised at all that it's basically the same way in America of trying to
Hmm.
find the
Hmm.
perfect candidate or situation to then say, hey, dear lawyers, what about this? And then you appeal and appeal and appeal up the chain until it gets there, and then you hopefully get a decision in your favor or not. That's unfortunately how it works. Um, and that's another thing that I kind of loathe about a lot of the left. Like I know my channel is about mostly ranting and bringing awareness to things, maybe educating people on topics here and there. It is mostly just like a cathartic release for me so that I don't like scream into a pillow every night and ruin my voice. Um, but like I'm also out there actually doing activism and shout out to one of my sisters for kind of putting this in perspective for me recently when I was just kind of feeling like, man, sometimes I wonder if I'm even doing stuff. And she was like, okay, so I love you, but you like you're too mean on yourself based on what you've told me, which she admits like it's only your word against no one else's, but from what you've told me it's like you were like crucial back in the day to helping allow for gay straight alliances to be created in any school in the province. Like I wasn't one of the main leaders, but like I was in the GSA at school and like went to several of the rallies and promoted and like wrote to the politicians. We got it across the province of Ontario in like what was it, like 2006, 2007, sometime in the early, like mid to late aughts. And I had done various other activism for humanitarian causes with the Nelson Mandela Foundation in South Africa. We even like went to like bitch at some parliamentarians in downtown Ottawa for it at
Hmm.
one point. It was like a field trip. Which also just felt so very patronizing. That was my first real experience with like, oh, these politicians are here for like the photo op and say, yeah, we absolutely hear you kids, but are they actually going to do anything a year from now? I personally doubt it, and sure enough, I was proven right.
Hmm.
Um, and helping resolve like the part of an impasse at the Battle of Billings Bridge in Ottawa when the Freedom Convoy was going on, constantly donating like basically 5% of my income to like charity even when I'm really really poor, just always trying to help people out, clearing trees when like the storm hit, doing grocery runs for people if need be, checking on neighbors after a snowstorm, shoveling if need be. She's like, you keep telling me of like all these different things and like fundraisers for raising money for residential school survivors, my current charity project that I'm helping out with and volunteering for, that's trying to actually clean the air and meaningfully get over this pandemic and helping teachers and marginalized people. So she's like, you are doing all these things that have meaningfully improved the lives of indigenous people, queer people, of disabled people. Like, you have done good things. You have made people's lives better, even if it's just like a total of maybe 50 people. That's 50 better lives. Like, shut up. And I'm like, okay, you know what? Fair point, but like, I'm still gonna complain. She's like, I fucking hate you. Um,
Yeah, no, I
which
mean,
is which is her way of saying she loves me.
I, I don't broadcast or talk about what I do in meat space, um, with regards to like charitable works or activism and all that sort of stuff, um, because that's me. That like I don't need to broadcast what
Yeah,
I'm
no,
doing.
that, like exactly.
Texas is a hard place
I hear
to
you.
push for this sort of thing, but it is what it is. I've been active in politics since I got lured into running a Darfur rally in our state's capital, which got me on this like
Government list.
weird. Well, it got me on this like political kick that I was on for, I don't know, years, doing activism, doing political work, working in the state government, um, to getting my law degree. I mean, like all of it was, I've, I do stuff, you know, and I know what it is, and I don't need anybody else to know what it is. Um, I'm hoping that other content creators and folks on the left are doing things, and maybe I don't know about them. I'm hoping that that's the case. I am,
I see a lot of fundraising streams, and I know
yeah,
people like donate to charity,
yeah,
or
yeah.
they'll advocate for also their community to donate to that charity as well.
And
It's like, hey, we're doing this special fundraiser for this thing. So
and I participated in some of those. So
yeah,
I've seen those
including
firsthand.
recently. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, with Aronach.
yeah, yeah.
It's full circle. It all comes around. Um, and I was ecstatic at the opportunity to do so. Um, and that's heartening to me because those are the things um that affect lives. And I'm not trying to discount content creation because we're trying to get the message out there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it
Um,
has its place.
yeah. And I'm sure that you've gotten it. I've gotten comments where it's like, this video really changed my perspective on this. Or wow, I never thought about this before.
Or I
And
never even knew about it. Yeah.
yeah, like my mixed race video. Ton of people it's like, oh, I never even thought about this before. I never knew that this was a thing. Um, that there were slurs for mixed race people.
Mm-hmm.
That those exist in the world. And um, I never knew that there's like actual scientific studies about the effects of representation, what it does to a populace, positive and negative. Um, it's fascinating, and I appreciate that. And the annoying and arduous dinner conversations that I've had with people trying to change their minds on stuff, you know, and the extra labor of just tiptoeing around other white leftists and not saying maybe you shouldn't say that because that veers a little too close to racism and you may be comfortable with it, but I'm not. Like
uh,
it's a weird situation because sometimes it's people that are big or bigger on the platform, and you see a bunch of people praising their work and you're like the POC in the background going, I don't know about that video, guys.
yeah.
I mean, do I want to be that voice right now? I don't know. I'm kind of tired and I need a nap and I don't want to start a Twitter war because some white left tuber decided to go on this rant that just veers a little too close to racism. Um,
Yeah, because then it's like, oh god, look, there's no such thing as a perfect leftist. Why are you guys always dunking on him? Blah 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 blah. It's like all I said was maybe don't do the thing. And
yeah,
sometimes I need that reminder. Sometimes people remind me. Sometimes they don't, because like I don't know unless I know, right?
like I vacillate all the time on the whole like, um, white leftist creators not attacking or not analyzing and breaking down certain countries' activities or a certain group's activities um, because they don't want to be seen as racist. Okay. And I'll put this out like the Chinese Communist Party or the North Korean Communist Party, and the things that they do and the authoritarian things that they do, the human rights violation, and all this sort of stuff that a lot of leftists don't touch because they don't want to be seen as the person. It's like, oh, it's a white person talking about Asian people in classic Orientalism, yellow scare type garbage, right? And I get it. I wish that more of them had the understanding and nuance to to talk about it. And then I see them go after things that they feel comfortable going after. Um, and it veers into stuff where it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, no, you shouldn't talk about any of those things because you clearly don't have the nuance or understanding to tackle the subject. And I don't know why you felt that it was okay to do this for like this particular group. Anti-Semitism, anyway. But um,
Oh yeah.
but okay, because that's like the dangers. Um, because I see some of that and I'm just like, okay, I get why you don't do the other stuff. But It's like, and I want to be fans of these people, you know. I want to promote Latin voices in this space. I want to promote Asian voices in this space, but that doesn't mean I want to stop being fans of white creators. I don't have any problem with white creators. You know, a lot of our favorites, yours and
Yeah,
mine,
yeah.
gonna be white creators. Okay. Um, and there's like, oh, the left or POC hate white people. It's like, no, like we all love like Brendan Fraser and
I
and
mean, like there's some controversy, so I'm like on the fence on that whole thing because like I get why a lot of people are nostalgic about Brendan Fraser, but at the same time, I got some moots online who are making very good points about a lot of his stumbles, especially in how he like talks about representation, especially of fat people. And it's like, there's better people to
yeah,
talk
no,
about this who are more versed in the subject. And so, like,
yeah,
it it,
I
it,
get that.
it goes back to nuance, right?
Mhm.
And
But
and
I mean, nobody like back to your point, nobody's perfect, and I don't like he's not Mark Wahlberg.
God, if I was there on 9/11, we'd have a different 9/11.
Like
Oh my God, dude.
there are levels, okay?
It's a spectrum.
Exactly. And I don't know. I'm far more forgiving than a lot of folks. Maybe it's because I'm old. Uh,
Maybe. I mean, like you're not much older than me though. I'm 34.
yeah, I'm pushing 40. Um, but and again, it's like I was having a discussion with another POC and it came up as like, look, if we didn't watch any problematic art, then we wouldn't watch art.
Yeah, I get it, but at the same time, like there should be a certain number of strikes, right? Like if someone's just messing up too often on the same thing, then like, okay, you know what? There's a problem here, or like the person isn't putting in the work. Like I think that there is such a thing as limits, especially on patience, and what those limits are for each person. That's up to the individual. Um, I mean,
Yeah, I'm just saying
I've had people like unfollow and block me because when I got a new phone, it didn't capitalize indigenous in a tweet, and they're like, "That's it. Like, you should have done this. You should know better." Blocked. I'm so disappointed. I'm like, okay, like, I'm not even gonna respond because apparently you're gonna block me. So like, all right, I would have figured if it was like Bothered Boy had a really shit opinion about women, and so I'm canceling him. Like, I figured that would be more relevant, but like again, it's to each individual person. So it's like, all right,
yeah,
that for that person that was the line,
yeah.
a typo on a new phone.
And yeah, I mean, people are gonna have different lines. I don't fault them for having a line. I mean, you do you. Okay. Um, it's just for me, I don't know. I feel like I'm far more forgiving. Maybe that's part of the religious upbringing,
It might
you
be.
know. I mean, there's a part of me that's just like if I see someone mess up, even repeatedly mess up, okay? Um, that I don't know. I don't like striking people out because I always think of myself, and how much of a shitbag that I was in the early 2000s. I was a right wing religious conservative with a lot of the things that entails.
Wow, talk
And
about a
because of,
character arc.
yeah, and because of phenomenal friends, great conversations, and people who would not give up on me, um, I changed a lot and I'm still trying to work on it. And I wasn't then, I wasn't trying to work on it. If Twitter existed back then there would be miles and lengths of me making incredibly horrible comments, people trying to correct me on them, and me doubling down on it because I wasn't there yet. So there's a part of me that's like, look, I've said some things that I am embarrassed and ashamed to even mention now when I was younger. Um, like those horrible, horrible things that I would have smacked myself in the face for saying. And like, if I could go back in time and beat that little shit's ass.
Beat the cringe out of him.
So personally, I find myself being far more forgiving on long-term faults on people because I hate giving up on people. I really do. In my personal life, and there's a privilege to that. I understand that. Okay. And everybody's got to secure their own safety and their own mental health. And me saying I can forgive them, that's a privilege. That's because I am in a privileged position that I am able to do that. I recognize that. And I don't fault people for not doing that. I'm just saying for me personally, I'm far more forgiving. And I'd rather err on that side than otherwise, because man, I still hope that people can change. It's Rocky 4, man. I can change. You can change. Everybody can change. We all can change.
And I think on that note, we'll call it. Hi, Bother Brigade. Thank you once again for tuning into yet another episode of Progressive Profiles. I hope you had fun learning all this new stuff about representation, especially in our actual history, and also talking about, religion and what it means to be Latino for both of us, and struggling with identity and representation. I hope you had a lot of fun and you learned a lot from this. What was your favorite part? Please let me know down below. And also, again, crucially, want to give out a massive shout out to the patrons who helped make this show possible. Thank you, Jean-Luc Desroches, Jennifer Randall, Botherer69, Jay Peterson, and Patrick Mansuri for your incredible and honestly, quite frankly, just outrageous support for me and what I'm at least trying to do here. And if you want to see some behind the scenes stuff that LegalKimchi and I talked about, or various other former guests on here, you get all those little exclusives over on Patreon, so maybe check it out or something. But this was a great time. Please go support LegalKimchi's content and play well, play mightily, and don't forget that black elves are entirely possible in a fictional world, and the fact that people think they aren't, definitely kind of what's bothering me today.